Ethan Miller had driven through the Midwest more times than he could remember, but there was something about the stretch of Route 9 that made his hands sweat against the steering wheel. He wasn't usually the type to let nerves get to him. He had covered war zones, criminal trials, and grisly accidents for the Chicago Tribune, and yet the thought of investigating a half-forgotten legend in a half-forgotten town somehow carried a weight heavier than all of that. The town was called Blackwood, a small dot on the map surrounded by thick forests and endless farmland, a place most people wouldn't even know existed if not for the rumors. Every 20 years, strange lights would appear in the sky over the woods, and with them came whispers of disappearances, stories the locals refused to discuss. His editor had laughed when Ethan pitched the idea, but he had agreed when Ethan argued that readers loved supernatural legends, especially those rooted in small-town Americana. He had taken the assignment as an excuse to get out of the city, but as the sun dipped behind the trees and the last light bled from the sky, he wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. The road narrowed as it approached the town, and the first sign of life was a decrepit neon motel sign buzzing weakly in the distance. The Blackwood Motel looked as if it had been abandoned decades ago. The parking lot was cracked, weeds sprouting through the concrete, and only one other car sat in front of the building, coated in dust. Ethan pulled into a space, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air was colder than he expected, and the forest pressed in on both sides of the road like a looming wall. The motel's front office smelled faintly of mildew, and the man behind. The counter barely looked up as Ethan checked in. He was heavyset, his hair greasy and matted, his expression unreadable. "Room 8, he muttered, sliding a key across the counter. The key was old-fashioned, attached to a brass tag that looked like it hadn't been polished since the 70s. Inside the room, the carpet was threadbare, the wallpaper peeling. A single lamp flickered when he turned it on. Still, Ethan dropped his bag on the bed and tried to shake off the feeling that the walls themselves were leaning closer to hear him breathe. He opened his notebook, jotting down first impressions of the town, when the sound of the buzzing sign outside seemed to seep through the window and into his skull. He closed the blinds, but the faint glow of the neon red still cut through the cracks, painting the room in a restless pulse. The next morning, Ethan found the diner across the street nearly empty. A waitress with tired eyes poured him coffee, but didn't bother asking where he was from. When he brought up the subject of the lights, her hand froze mid-air, the pot trembling just slightly before she set it back on the table. "We don't talk about that," she said, her voice flat. Ethan pressed, but her eyes darted toward the lone man sitting in the corner booth. The sheriff, if his badge was real. Sheriff Collins looked up from his paper, his stare cool and warning. Ethan raised a hand in polite acknowledgement, but the sheriff simply returned to his coffee. The only person who seemed willing to talk was Grace Parker, the town's librarian. He found her stacking books in the quiet, dusty library later that afternoon. She was younger than he expected, in her late 30s, with kind but cautious eyes. When he introduced himself, she hesitated before finally agreeing to answer a few questions. "The lights aren't just stories," she whispered when they sat in the back corner. "They come every 20 years. People vanish when they do. My brother disappeared the last time in 2005. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. She told him about strange glows in the forest, people hearing whispers, the town records vanishing from the sheriff's office afterward. "It's like someone wanted it erased," she said. "But everyone here knows. We just don't talk about it." That night in his motel room, Ethan dreamed of flickering lights bleeding through the trees, whispers and voices he almost recognized. He woke with a start to find the lamp flickering again, though he was sure he had turned it off. A voice drifted through the darkness, faint but close, as if someone stood right outside his window. "Don't look at the lights," it whispered, and then the sound was gone, leaving him frozen under the thin motel blanket. He waited, his heart pounding, until finally exhaustion overtook him again. The following day, he returned to the library, hoping to find more from Grace, but she wasn't there. Instead, he found an old newspaper microfilm reel that hadn't been cataloged properly. It mentioned disappearances in the 1940s and again in the 1980s, always coinciding with reports of lights. As he was scrolling through, the microfilm flickered, and for a split second, he thought he saw a face staring back at him in the static of the machine, pale and eyeless. He staggered back, convinced his mind was playing tricks. That evening, he wandered to the edge of the forest where the railroad tracks cut into the trees. The sun had just set and a low fog had rolled in. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the air seemed to hum. A faint glow appeared through the fog, high above the trees at first, then slowly descending. Ethan raised his camera, snapping shots, but when he checked the display, the images were blurred, distorted, as if the light itself bent the lens. He followed the glow deeper into the trees, the fog wrapping around him, the ground damp and uneven. Then he saw them shadows moving between the trunks. They looked human at first, but their limbs stretched too long, their heads cocked at unnatural angles. He blinked, and they vanished, leaving him alone. Sheriff Collins appeared suddenly, stepping from the fog. His flashlight beam cut across Ethan's chest. "You shouldn't be out here," the sheriff said. His tone was calm, almost gentle, but something in his eyes made Ethan's skin crawl. "People get lost in these woods." Ethan tried to explain that he was investigating, that he had proof on his camera, but Collins only shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't have come back when the lights returned." The words didn't make sense. "Back?" Ethan asked, but before he could demand more, the sheriff grabbed his arm with a grip far stronger than expected. "It's too late now," Collins said, dragging him deeper into the forest. Ethan struggled, the camera swinging wildly, the beam of the flashlight bouncing over trees that seemed to stretch endlessly. Then the light in the sky grew brighter, flooding the clearing they entered. The sheriff let go suddenly, stepping back into the shadows as if he no longer wanted to be near what was coming. The forest fell silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of leaves. The glow expanded, swallowing the clearing in blinding light. Ethan raised his arm to shield his face, but the light burned through his eyelids, searing into his skull. He felt them before he saw them, towering figures, faceless and shifting, surrounding him. Their presence pressed against his chest, crushing his breath. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His camera hit the ground, still recording, capturing the last moments as he was lifted from the earth. His body, dissolving into the glow-dot morning, broke over Blackwood as if nothing had happened. The motel parking lot was empty. Ethan's car still there, but his room stripped bare. Grace found his notebook lying on the bedspread, the final line scrawled in frantic handwriting. "The lights want us all." She closed the notebook slowly, her hands trembling. The neon motel sign buzzed faintly in the distance, the same endless pulse. When she looked out the window of the library later that day, the sun dipping low behind the trees, she saw the glow rising again over the forest. Townsfolk would continue to whisper, to pretend nothing was happening, to bury the stories for another 20 years. But Grace knew Ethan had been right. The lights weren't finished, and next time, they wouldn't just take a few souls from Blackwood. They were waiting for everyone.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.